What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content that I'm uploading onto my channel, then feel free to subscribe, and you can also offer suggestions on topics and characters and storylines and whatnot that we can have discussions on later on in this channel. Okay, so as promised, we are going to cover the Death of X event, the death of Cyclops. Now, to provide a little bit of context here, to really do a little bit of explanation, we need to talk about the Terrigen Mists in terms of what was going on and what led up to this current moment. Because one of the big issues that I had with this story was that writers Jeff Lemire and Charles Soule didn't really provide any explanation to this. It was just the Terrigen Mists are on Earth. Now, this is largely due to the very nature of All New, All Different Marvel in the sense that it really just kind of picks up from before Secret Wars, and it basically nullifies the purpose of Secret Wars. But the idea here was that it really just kind of continued the ongoing themes, and so it requires us to really know what was going on. So historically speaking, in the realm of Marvel Comics, the Terrigen Mists are literally just gases. That's really all they are. But they exist for the purpose of allowing Inhumans to be exposed to the mists and then taking on their true form. The problem with this is that when a Inhuman undergoes Terrigenesis, it's a permanent genetic modification, meaning they can never go back to the way they were before. They're stuck that way until the day they die, and for the rest of their life. Now, the Terrigen process or Terrigenesis had been tightly controlled by the Inhuman royal family, which is to say Black Bolt and Medusa. Only those who were part of the Inhuman royal city or who were in the Inhuman royal city were allowed to undergo Terrigenesis, and then they were very closely monitored, after which whatever form they took on would establish what role they played within the Inhuman royal family itself, or the Inhuman community of Attilan. The problem with all of this stuff was that during Jonathan Hickman's story Infinity, which was part of his run on Avengers and New Avengers, we had the villain Thanos show up on Earth looking for his son Thane. This led him to a conflict with the Inhumans, and in the battle, Black Bolt of the Inhumans had basically detonated the Terrigen bomb. And what that did is it allowed the mist to spread all throughout the planet Earth. Now, this led into Charles Soule's story of Inhumanity, or I guess it was Inhuman, and it also led into Inhumanity. Those are two separate things, but Charles Soule's run basically told us that where we originally thought it was just Black Bolt and the Inhumans in Attilan, there had actually been Inhuman communities all over the world that no one ever knew about and had been operating in secrecy for thousands of years. And so this really just allowed Charles Soule to bolster the ranks of the Inhumans, but it allowed him to introduce what are called new Inhumans, which were the newer Inhumans that you heard about, that you had seen in Marvel Comics recently with like Naja, I think is how you pronounce it, and so on and so forth. And so what Death of X does is it basically continues this trend of the Terrigen Mists moving across the planet Earth. Now, after the Terrigen bomb had been detonated, and after Black Bolt had basically been removed from his position as king and Medusa taking his place as queen, after it got to the point where all these Inhumans were being woken up, we saw different stories with characters like Lash and so on and so forth, but we had Crystal of the Inhumans, who was basically leading this sort of field team that was designed for the purpose of going around and finding Inhumans who had just newly developed with their powers, and then basically bringing them into the fold of the official Inhuman group, the official Inhuman family, as it was led by Medusa. Now, with regards to the main Death of X story, again, because of the fact that this just kind of continues from before Secret Wars, there are a couple gaps that are left here. There are some questions that are available here that Marvel just doesn't answer. But with regards to this, the answers that they do give us are really just kind of like basic nonsensical answers, to be honest. Like, there's really no substance to them. So initially picking up with Cyclops and Emma Frost, this also comes out of the X-Men run where Cyclops had basically just like become the new Magneto. That's the easiest way to describe him. He'd become more fanatical, he'd become more dangerous. That was the purpose behind Brian Michael Bendis introducing all new X-Men, is it was Beast going to the past and grabbing the old X-Men, bringing them to the present day and showing Cyclops who he used to be versus who he is now. The problem with this is that it didn't change Cyclops' mind. He still believed himself to be this kind of messiah of mutant kind, and he was going to lead them to what he considered to be greatness, which was basically a parallel to Magneto's idea that mutants are going to take over the world. And so with this story, we initially open up with the mutants themselves, with Cyclops' X-Men, answering a distress call from Muir Island. Now, what Jeff Lemire and what Charles Soule do is they actually take the concept of the Inhumans communicating with one another and talking, and they run it parallel with the X-Men themselves. So while Cyclops and his team are investigating this emergency, we also have Crystal leading her field team of Inhumans who are heading towards Japan, basically, where we're going to basically learn that the Terrigen Mists are making their way there. And so it's really just kind of like all roads lead to Rome. At least that really seems to be what's happening here. And so with Cyclops and his team arriving at Muir Island, they find this massive research facility. Now, this is something that had been that way for a long time. Muir Island had been a huge research facility, and the most notable person to run alongside this was Maura McTaggart. But there had also been people who had taken their leave here and there and had worked and so on. But when they get there, they basically find that all the mutant researchers are dead. All those individuals who are mutants are bleeding. They're suffering from some extremely advanced version of smallpox, and it all just really seems to be killing them. And so picking up with the Inhumans again, picking up with Crystal's team, we again find them basically traveling to where all these Inhumans are going into their cocoon phase when they first are exposed to the Terrigen Mist, and they're all beginning to emerge. But in the middle of this, Hydra has basically shown up for the purpose of capturing these cocoons. Now, we're not really given a reason why Hydra is here, but Hydra being what it is, Jeff Lemire and Charles Soule basically say, you guys know why they're here. You know, of course, their goal is to basically capture these Inhuman cocoons and then indoctrinate the Inhumans into the Hydra belief system and allow Hydra to use them for their own purposes. And so while you have, you know, Crystal and her team fending off against Hydra, switching back to Cyclops and everybody, we also have all these different multiple versions of Jamie Madrox that are all dead. Now, Jamie Madrox has long since been retired here, and this is something that didn't really make any sense. And this is something that really kind of stood out to me. And the reason why is this: Jamie Madrox had basically taken over the role as head of X Factor, and he had moved it away from being like a government-sanctioned superhero team to being like an investigative team, not unlike Jessica Jones' Alias Investigations. X Factor was a detective group, more or less, and it worked for the stories that we were getting at the time. I mean, it wasn't a standout publication, but X Factor never really was one of the greatest standout publications after the Louise Simonson and Walt Simonson run, when they left the title and the original X-Men went back to the main X-Men team in the 1980s, I think it was. But the idea here is that Jamie Madrox had long since retired, and after he left, he had married Layla Miller, who is a mutant that has the ability, that's basically immune from reality warping, but she also has the ability to resurrect the dead and to heal anyone. Now, her resurrecting the dead has a caveat that she can only resurrect those who have died within moments, so she would literally have to have been right at Jamie Madrox's side when he died in order to make sure that he came back from the dead. But her being able to heal him in this instance, he's surviving, or at least it seems like he's surviving with a couple moments left in his life. And if Layla Miller had been around, or if he had even called his wife, she would have been able to basically heal him, restore him back to normal, but this didn't happen. And so it's really just kind of Charles Soule and Jeff Lemire turning a blind eye to the question of what happened with Layla Miller. Why isn't she healing her husband? Where is she at? It's really them just kind of ignoring that whole thing, because in truth, it would have created a huge plot hole, and the story probably wouldn't have existed if Layla Miller were here right now. But the fact remains that once they get into the facility and they begin poking around, we also have Cyclops becoming ill. Cyclops starts coughing and getting sick. Now, this would be a huge point for the story later on. But again, jumping back to the Inhumans, we of course have these new Inhumans going against Hydra, facing off against these Hydra forces. There's really not a whole lot to see here, but there is one Inhuman that reemerged named Daisuke, I think it is. And this is really just a guy that has the power to emit these rays, these forms of energy that essentially put people to sleep. And that's exactly what he does. He basically uses his powers on Hydra, and these Hydra agents end up passing out and collapsing. And as a result, he's basically inducted into the field team by Crystal, just because of the fact that his powers seem to be so impressive. And so from here, we have these two situations of the Inhumans and the mutants being paralleled against one another, in the sense that Crystal's talking to Daisuke and she says, hey, look, welcome to the Inhumans. You're part of our group. We watch out for our own. We always make sure our own are safe. Now, this is designed, again, to really mirror Cyclops' reaction, in the sense that where Crystal inducting Daisuke into the Inhumans is a celebratory thing, Cyclops is saying, like, this Terrigen Mist is killing us, and it's my job to make sure our mutants are protected. And so, in effect, he's basically gonna wage a war against the Inhumans due to the fact that he looks at the Inhumans themselves as a threat against mutant kind. Now, from this point, we basically jump to the New Attilan, the city of New Attilan, with Medusa herself. Now, this is a meeting between Medusa and Storm. This is actually pretty important, just because of the fact that it shows us that not everybody's taking Cyclops' stance. Not everybody takes a stance with Cyclops saying, well, the Inhumans are a threat now because the Terrigen Mists are killing us. Not only that, there's no answer, really no definitive answer given to us as to why the Terrigen Mists are killing the mutants, because keep in mind, mutants have been exposed to Terrigen Mists multiple times over the course of Marvel's publication history. It's happened so many times. Historically speaking, I mean, there's been times where Magneto was exposed to the Terrigen Mist. There's the instance, Son of M, after the House of M event, where so many mutants lost their powers, that Quicksilver got the genius idea to expose mutants to the Terrigen Mist. It jump-started their powers, and it made them too extreme for a lot of mutants to handle, but it didn't kill them. It didn't cause like Mpox, what's being called right now. And so this raises just as many questions of, well, what happened? Like, why are the Mist suddenly different now? And Storm asked this question, and even Medusa asked this question. The only answer that's given here is, well, the atmosphere somehow changed, or they interact with the atmosphere. We don't really know. This is really just kind of Marvel saying, there's no answer to this. We're just doing this for the sake of the story. It's a little disappointing, but you know, it doesn't change the fact that this is where things are right now, that for whatever reason beyond the realm of explanation, that the Terrigen Mists have somehow adjusted, they've changed, and the result is that they're now killing mutants as opposed to simply just turning Inhumans, or turning, I guess allowing Inhumans to manifest themselves. Now, with Storm basically leaving, one of the things that she says here is that for her, she wasn't sure whether or not this was intentional, whether or not it was intentional of the Inhumans to launch an attack against the X-Men. Now, a lot of you guys who've been reading the reviews of Death of X have probably heard that phrase that the X-Men were acting out of character. That's what this is referencing. There's no reason whatsoever for Storm to believe that the Inhumans are intentionally trying to kill them, especially considering the fact that the Inhumans and the mutants have worked together on a multitude of occasions. The most notable instance of the two groups working together was when the son of Cyclops and Madeline Pryor, Nathan Summers, was kidnapped by the villain Apocalypse. When Apocalypse had attacked Attilan and taken some of its citizenry as his four horsemen, Cyclops, alongside Black Bolt and a multitude of Inhumans and X-Men, fought together against Apocalypse. They all pretty much lost, but they fought against Apocalypse, and they held their own as long as they could. There's been a slew of instances where the Inhumans and the X-Men have worked together, and so it seems to come out of left field that suddenly Storm doesn't trust Medusa right now, and suddenly Storm believes that Medusa is working against them. But again, like I said, this is really just a lot of the characters acting out of character. This is one of the things that doesn't really seem to make a whole lot of sense. But as Storm begins to take her leave, we suddenly have, Emma Frost alongside the Stepford Cuckoos, allowing Cyclops' mind to be broadcast to the world as a whole. Now, to sidetrack here for a second, the Stepford Cuckoos are a group that we've never really talked about before, but they come out of Grant Morrison's New X-Men, and at least I believe it's Grant Morrison's New X-Men. It may be Chuck Austin's time when he took over the series, but the idea here anyway is that they came out of the New X-Men line of stories, and the concept is that they're basically clones of Emma Frost, but they're not on the same level individually. Instead, the Stepford Cuckoos have the ability to basically create a hive mind of sorts. Now, there were originally 4 of them, but one of them died during Quentin Quire's uprising at the Xavier Institute, which is actually a pretty cool story, but it was designed to show the consequence of his, recklessness and the fact that he was trying not to be a villain, but being a villain at the same time. But the idea here is that the Stepford Cuckoos working alongside Emma Frost effectively have the power of Cerebro. They're capable as Cerebro when Charles Xavier's using it by broadcasting the speech and the mannerisms and the thoughts of Cyclops all across the world. Now, the crazy thing about this is Cyclops immediately takes a stance. The Inhumans are killing mutants. That's basically what his message is. His message is the Inhumans, during the events of Infinity, had basically set off the Terrigen bomb. They had spread, this Terrigenesis all across the planet. And the idea here is that their actions are effectively leading to the death of mutants all over the place. Not only that, he also begins to delve into the realm of speculation and say, well, it may also be fatal to humans. Now, there's no reason for Cyclops to believe this, but he's saying this for the simple purpose of making his case. And he's saying this for the purpose of saying, hey, look, we need to get rid of the Inhumans. The Inhumans are the threat now. We need to go to war with the Inhumans. So what if he just spouts a little bit of nonsense here and there, if he throws out some propaganda? I mean, I'm not saying it's okay. I'm saying from the perspective of the story, that's Cyclops' stance. Well, so what if I'm lying a little bit? In the end, it still achieves the goal of going to war with the Inhumans and basically bringing the Inhumans down and bringing the Earth back unto ourselves. Now, the funny thing about this, though, is that in the middle of all this, we also have the X-Men themselves. We have Ileana Rasputin, Magic, who again has the ability to create dimensional barriers and so on and so forth. They're all addressing Emma Frost, and they all say, look, we want to know what's going on. We want to know what the play is, because this was done without their knowledge. They didn't know that Cyclops was going to broadcast to the world and effectively wage war on the Inhumans, making them a target for all of humanity to turn their sights on, as opposed to looking at mutants. And so when they initially ask questions, Emma Frost says, no, not now, we're busy. Now, this is going to be a really, really, really important thing when we get to the end of the story. But from this point going forward, it's really all just panic. It's all just pandemonium. Now, the Inhumans are actually doing the right thing here. Because of what's going on, because the myths are proving deadly to mutants, the first thought of the Inhumans is, okay, well then let's get the myths away from the major cities. Let's get them away, because keep in mind, the Inhumans can't simply control the myths under normal circumstances. It's not like they can just grab the Terrigen Mist, put them back in a bottle. I mean, the genie's out of the bottle now. I mean, there's nothing they can do. All they can do is try to move the Terrigen Mist, but it's far too massive of a cloud to confine into one singular space all over again. There's really nothing they can do. And so what ends up happening here is Crystal, along with another Inhuman, work together in an effort to try to move this cloud. Now, of course, Crystal is a character that has the ability to control the elements. She's not on par with Storm, but she does have the ability to control the elements. The issue with this is that even between Crystal and this other Inhuman, they're really not capable of doing this. You know, ISO's doing the best she can, but they're not able to push it back on their own. And so in the end, they're actually joined by Storm, and Storm allows, you know, I guess brings her abilities to the table, and the three of them are successfully able to push this massive cloud away from a populated city, which in turn basically shows that they're trying to work alongside the mutants, and they're trying to make sure that things are coming out successfully with one another. Now, from here, we basically pick up with the arrival of Colossus. Now, the arrival of Colossus is actually pretty cool, just because of the fact that he's a well-established character in the X-Men. And so one of the things that you guys will notice in a lot of the X-Men publications when it comes to certain writers is they will pay special attention to the legacy of individuals. For example, with Colossus, he first popped up on the scene with Giant Size X-Men issue #1. He's been around in Marvel Comics since 1975. He's one of the longest running X-Men aside from the original 5 of Cyclops, Angel, Warren Worthington, Beast, Iceman, and Jean Grey. He's one of the original ones, you know, one of the original guys. And I guess he's the next generation of the new original guys, if that makes any sense. But the fact remains here that he holds a lot of clout. This is especially important because of the fact that when the Legacy virus showed up, when it was created, you know, and it began killing mutants off all over the place, he sacrificed his life to develop a cure. Now, of course, he did come back during Joss Whedon's run of Astonishing X-Men, but the idea is that Colossus has routinely put his life on the line to preserve the lives of others. And so with his arrival, it's really a scenario where he's not to be ignored. And so he, alongside, Magic, Illyana Rasputin, say, we want to know what's going on. We want to know what's happening here right now. And so the result is that we essentially have, Cyclops saying, okay, what we're doing is we're basically gathering the most powerful mutants that we can find, the most capable mutants that we can find in order to save what mutants are left, and then we're all going to go to war with the Inhumans. That's really just his stance here. That's really his position, saying we're all just going to destroy him. And so, from this point going forward, it's really the, Crystal's Inhuman team trying to manage the chaos. And the reason for this is because, with the cloud that was heading towards Madrid, there were a lot of people who were panicking. There were a lot of people who were freaking out. They believed their death was imminent because of what Cyclops said. And so what Crystal does is she has Daisuke use his powers to basically put everybody to sleep, to put everybody to rest. Now keep in mind, Daisuke doesn't have total control over his abilities yet. And the result is that when he uses them, everyone's affected except for the Inhumans, meaning that the X-Men of Storm's team are all put to sleep. And so switching over to Emma Frost, we essentially have her communicating with Magneto. And she essentially says, look, we need you here. Now, Emma Frost saying this is not to be taken lightly. It's not something small. It's not an unreasonable thing. This is a big deal because, Magneto is a guy that's routinely gone against the X-Men a bit, but if Magneto is good at anything, it's being a leader. He's extremely good at leading groups of people. It doesn't necessarily mean he leads them to victory consistently, but it does mean that when it comes down to it, he's definitely a guy that you want to have in your corner. And so, following this, I guess Daisuke using his powers in Madrid, the most logical scenario happens in the sense that the X-Men begin to come to, and when they do, they basically look at the Inhumans as though they were working against them. Crystal says, hey, we've got to go get everybody together, we've got to wake the mutants up, we've got to make sure everything's sorted out. But, Storm and her team have more or less turned against them and saying, we thought you were on our side, but when we came here to help, you used your powers on us, in a way that was not beneficial. You effectively put us to sleep because you considered us just as panicky and just as dangerous as everybody else. Now, again, this is pretty out of character for these guys. I mean, it's pretty out of character for Storm to react in such a panicky way, but it doesn't change the fact that this is the idea that she's going for. This is where her character is right now with regards to the confines of the story. And so from here, we actually switch to Yorkshire, England, and we pick up with the Stepford Cuckoos, and they're going to grab a guy named Alchemy. Now, we'll talk about him a little more here in a second, but Alchemy is actually a pretty capable mutant. He's pretty powerful in terms of the kind of things that he can do. He's not reality warping powerful, but he is pretty capable. And so following this, we basically learn that Emma Frost bringing together, bringing in Magneto, bringing him into the fold alongside Colossus and Wolfsbane and several others, was not designed to inherently wage war against the Inhumans. It was designed to serve a purpose of distraction. And the reason why is because Magneto shows up and begins, to bombard them, begins to encase them. And the X-Men and the Inhumans are both on the counterattack, trying to stay alive really as best they can, but also trying to figure out what it is that Magneto's doing. And so switching over to Cyclops alongside Emma Frost and the arrival of Alchemy, this is when we get a chance to talk about his character. So Alchemy is a guy, when he first showed up, he had the ability to turn objects into gold. He really had like the Midas touch. But the reason why they called him Alchemy is, of course, alchemy was the study, or at least at one facet of alchemy was a study of, turning objects into gold, creating gold, so on and so forth. But as time progressed, his powers evolved to the point, or at least he gained enough control over his powers, that he could essentially manipulate the chemical structure of things. And so he could turn gases into other things. He could turn water into something else. He could turn, a physical object into something else. He could manipulate the chemical structure of matter in order to transmogrify it, basically. Now, this does not mean he can warp reality. This simply just means that he can take a gas, turn it into a liquid, turn a liquid into a gas, rearrange the molecular structure of anything that's in a liquid, gas, or solid state, and then, you know, allow it to go from there. And so what we learn is that the basis behind him being here is to literally assault the Terrigen Cloud, to basically change the Terrigen Cloud. Now, of course, once this happens, you know, once the X-Men of, once that Medusa and her team basically realize what's going on, that, you know, Cyclops is going to try to eliminate the Terrigen Cloud, this leads to a direct conflict between the two. And the reason why is because Medusa recognizes the danger of the Terrigen Cloud, right? Like, she realizes that it's going to, that it is killing X-Men, but in her mind, it's also bringing her people out of seclusion. It's allowing her to bolster the ranks of Inhumans. And in her mind, if it increases the number of Inhumans, then that's the rightful role they're supposed to play. That's her role as queen, is to ensure that those people who are Inhumans learn about their gifts and are brought into the Inhuman fold. And so in her mind, the Cyclops is basically blocking her way, is essentially stripping her of her power, and basically denying those people who are Inhumans their birthright. And so because of this, you know, of course, she attacks Sunfire, who's there for the purpose of allowing, you know, alchemy to get up to the cloud and, you know, change it and so on. But while the Inhumans are distracted at the very least, or at least while it seems like they're delayed under the belief that they've stopped Cyclops from having this cloud altered, we find out that Sunfire was successful in doing this. That Sunfire was successful in taking alchemy to this cloud and allowing him to alter the molecular structure of this cloud so that it's no longer Terrigen mist in its normal form, and it's no longer poisonous to mutants. The result of this is that this just kind of creates an all-out conflict between the two groups, simply because of the fact that in the eyes of Medusa, this is something that's crossing the line. This is something that is beyond unreasonable. Now, the other half of this is that Black Bolt had kind of been holding back this whole time, because as we know, Black Bolt is really more of a hands-on guy. And so the notion here was for Medusa to basically say, let's use diplomacy to solve this problem. But if we cannot use diplomacy, then Black Bolt, you step in. And that's exactly what happens. You know, because of the fact that this cloud's been destroyed, because of the fact that no more Inhumans, you know, will really be waking up, or at least it doesn't seem that way, in response, Black Bolt uses his voice, shouts at Cyclops, and completely destroys his body. And so picking up, like literally, we just get like the death of Cyclops, and then 1 week later, there's no middle ground here. Like, we literally just jump to a week later. But picking up, we basically have Storm offering the eulogy at the burial of Cyclops, you know, at his funeral. And then we also have Emma Frost meeting with Havoc. Now, her meeting with Havoc is basically the revelation to everything that's been going on. And what we learn here is that almost immediately after Cyclops had been exposed to the Terrigen Mist, he had succumbed to its effects. He had, or at least it seemed like he had essentially died. And so the result was that everything that had taken place in the story from the time that really after Cyclops had left the facility at Muir Island all the way up to his death at the hands of Black Bolt was all fake. That was all an illusion that had been created by Emma Frost. And the reason she did this was because she wanted Cyclops to be a martyr. She wanted Cyclops to be an ideology that mutants could rally behind. Now, the core basis behind why she did this is something that we'll probably find out in the Inhumans versus X-Men story. But for right now, this is really just the gist of it. It's really the fact that, yes, Cyclops died, but he didn't die because he was killed by Black Bolt. He died because he was exposed to the Terrigen Mist. And the result was that Emma Frost had basically used her powers to trick the world into believing that Inhumans were inherently evil, that Inhumans were the reason why mutants were being killed, that Inhumans were intentionally and systematically targeting mutants. Not only that, she had basically instigated the scenario for why the Inhumans and the X-Men are gonna go to war against each other in the first place anyway. But with that being said, we're gonna go ahead and bring this video to an end. If you guys are new here to Comics Explained, be sure to hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, drop a like and leave a comment down below. Let me know what you guys think about this story, Death of X. God, that brain fart. I have ADD so bad, it's not even funny. But yeah, leave a comment, let me know what you guys thought about Death of X, and yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.